Here I find you. I think I could love you.
So Ashley, thanks for joining the How Strong podcast. This is a first for me because I've always wanted to have an opportunity for people to come on that were sort of open for work, something like on LinkedIn. And you're in that space right now. And I think I want to go back just a little bit, though, just so everyone knows how you and I met before we start continuing. You and I met about a year ago, and I was working for a company. I was the head of growth for a fairly large Fortune 500 company. And you were there to basically be my peer. So you were going to be head of operations for a fairly large company. That it was you and I were going to be responsible for building out a new division for this company. I was going to be heading up growth, and you were going to be heading up operations. And I remember when your resume came through, it's pretty amazing. Really solid background, definitely at that executive level. And it was hard to look. It was hard to look at and go, "This is someone that." Not really hard. It was like you could come in here and really make a difference in this organization. And I had been there for about 8 months, and my experience with that organization, in terms of being able to come in and own it, and to be able to make it your own, and to have the autonomy to build this out and be successful, and then lean on just a ton of your experiences. I mean, you were with Amazon, leading Amazon on the operation side, and I was a little bit concerned that when you would come in, that you wouldn't have the opportunity to be who you were. And we had spent some time on the interview side, and in typical fashion, in every interview I've ever done, I'll look at the resume when we're looking at candidates, but once we get into the room and we start talking about who you are as a candidate, I don't look at your resume. I'm just going to assume that whatever you've told me on the resume, everything that's an accolade is going to be true, and you're going to have that speech nailed down, and it's just going to be truthful from your perspective. And I'm not there to see if you're lying. I'm there to see who you are as a person and how you'd fit into this organization. And when I sat down with you and we started going over those questions, the resume was fantastic. Your background was really strong. And then we started talking about who you are as a person, and what are you looking for in terms of, after work, like what's your work-life balance look like? That wasn't the reason why I was skewed by not bringing you on. It was, I really don't feel like if I brought her in here, she would be doing the best work she possibly could be doing. And it's not because of her. And I didn't want you to be in the same situation that I was in. And it was painful to kind of say, hey, we're letting someone go. But at the end of the day, we're not going to give her the best opportunity to succeed here. And I think that was the reason. So it's really strange to kind of have you on. I'm part of the reason why you didn't get hired. But I think you know me by now that part of that reason was because it wasn't going to be good for you. I think you and I are very similar in terms of attitude, our executive level, what we're expecting to do. We want to take ownership when we come in and make this thing our own. And that was the reason. So that's a short background. It's odd to have someone on here that I didn't hire, but it was for a very good reason. And I think we kept in touch since then. I think pretty soon after the interview, I reached out to you and said, hey, we need to stay in touch because I'd like to see you do some great things. So that's your perspective, right? Like, I don't want to put words in your mouth. It was very amicable. Like, I didn't say no. We stayed friends after that, and we've kind of tried to help each other out during that time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Agree with everything. It was funny too, because I remember when I had flown out for the final round interview where we had originally met. I remember I met a ton of people that day, like quite a few. But I remember you were the one that I was like, oh God, I don't know if he likes me. You were like the only one where I was like, oh, he's, because I remember you took my resume and you flipped it over. Like you're right. You didn't even look at it. And you said, I'm going to assume everything on here is true. And then what I actually really liked, and I think is helped us keep in touch, is you were just interested in sort of, like you said, we were going to be peers. We were going to be working together. So you were more concerned, I felt like, which is good, of learning, like, who is this person? Like, can I work with them? Like, what are they like? Competencies and abilities aside. And I think there was, a bit of a connection and overlap there, which has really enabled us to stay in touch.
Yeah, and I think part of it, after hearing you say that, I think part of it also was, I didn't want to get in that situation where misery loves company.
Yeah.
Like you and I would have been working together as peers, and we would have, been in that same situation. And I think it's healthier that you're in a situation that you can control, and that they give you an opportunity to be the best person you possibly can be for that role. And I think, it turned out the same way for me. I ended up not being in that organization long. Wasn't the right fit. And it happens sometimes, and that's okay too. Good experience either way. But you find yourself just like me. I mean, you find yourself open for work. And what sort of struck me about you is when I look at your background and I looked on LinkedIn and I have your resume from before, is, I see a ton of people on LinkedIn open for work all the time. They have that open for work shingle on their profile picture, and it pains me to see that. And especially someone, you don't have that on there, which is great. But I think what's nice is that you've got this really strong background, really strong career. I know you as a person, to see someone like you that's still open for work. And that it surprises me. Like, it really surprises me when I look at some of the jobs that are out there. And we had talked about it before. If you're not in that marketing function or branding or creative space, there's a lot of people on LinkedIn who are open for work who are in that space, but they have the tools available to them to amplify themselves in a marketing sort of branding way. Someone who's in a different job, who's managing operations, it's hard to sort of amplify yourself without having the tools or know-how on the marketing side. And so part of what I wanted to do here was just to amplify you as one, first and foremost, as a person. Your history and job history speak for itself. I mean, you've worked some really strong companies, really good leadership experiences. And when I saw open for work, not that you had it tagged, but that you are open for work, that how is it possible that someone like you, as bright as you are, with a really strong background, is still looking for something?
Yeah, great question. I think, honestly, the main reason is, just to give like a quick background for people like listening. So my background is in operations, mostly with strategy and also business development. So I have worked for Fortune 100s from Amazon to Airbus, and I've also worked for like tech-based SaaS startups. So my experience really has run the gamut from, Fortune 5 to scrappy, fast-growing tech startup. So, which has really given me a good idea of like basically what it takes to succeed in any environment. But I think one of the reasons that I'm still open for work is at this point in my career, I'm not accepting just any job offer. I'm really taking the time to make sure that, like you said, if I had been offered that position for the company we had both first met at, it's like you said, like I wouldn't have been happy. Not necessarily happy, but like it wouldn't have been a good fit for either party. And so, and I think that's actually a great quality that you have, because there's definitely been some interviews I've gotten like a handful of offers over the past few months where you can just tell, like there's not that there's anything wrong with the company. Like the company is great. There's nothing wrong with me, the candidate. It's just, sometimes you can tell it's not going to be compatible. So I think this time, the reason I'm still open for work is I am being very, very cognizant of sort of like long-term compatibility, but like also, to be frank, like it's tough out there. I mean, almost every other day I hear of a friend or a friend of a friend who's been laid off, or whose company has downsized, or, the company got acquired. So there's a lot of that going around. But also the type of roles I'm looking for, which are more senior, like head of operations roles, those don't come around a lot. It's not like when I was younger and I was working more like entry-level sales or operations roles. Like those are kind of a dime a dozen. But also, the higher you get up in your career, the more senior, the less often those roles do pop up. Think of it. If you have like a head of operations at a company, you probably have like 5 direct reports, but you only have one head of operations. So like, it's just one of those trade-offs, I guess, that comes, that comes with experience.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it too, because I think part of holding back and not applying for everything under the sun just because you need to find something.
Yes.
The fact that you invest, and I know what this is like too, because I think we've been open for work the same time period, is that when we do apply, the amount of research that goes into what the company does, what the role is going to be doing, I don't really think that HR understands that when I apply, the steps I go through is I do a ton of research on the company.
Absolutely.
I do a ton of research on the people, the projects it's done. I go through their social channels. I do a deep dive, and you'll notice too that sometimes on my LinkedIn, I'll put an ebook out, and a lot of that is creating ebooks on companies that I'm really focused on trying to work for. They have an open position on. I would say about 20 hours goes into at least understanding the company, the position, who had it before.
Yeah.
I'll follow that person who's left and gone somewhere else. It helps me to understand if that's a new position, or it's been there's been a vacancy for a long time. There's just a ton of stuff that goes on when you prepare to even just do the application.
Absolutely.
And then like you said, I think a lot of the stuff that you do is you customize the resume. You customize. I mean, that's 101. Customize the resume.
You have to. And I will say, when it comes to customizing resumes, because there are, like I said, I know quite a few. I live in New York, so there's a lot of people here. There's a lot of people looking for jobs. I have my own consulting right now. One of the for clients I took on recently, it was for a one-time thing where basically there's this young woman. She needed help. Just basically, it was like she was like, I don't know how to navigate this job market in terms of resume, like applying for jobs, what to do. And I sort of broke it down into a few things. One, like you said, you can't really just mass apply. You can, but in my experience, you need to tailor your resume. And in response to that, ChatGPT is going to be like your best friend. Because now the way job applications work is that they have an AI that looks at all these resumes before a recruiter does. And then the recruiter looks at the ones that the AI has sort of vetted and been like, yeah, these are good. Take a look at them. So in order, though, to get the AI to like your resume, like you got to tailor it to keywords. So, a lot of times it's like replacing certain words with keywords that are in their job description, altering, highlighting certain experiences that you have. Like personally, I have like 3 different resume versions, all tailored for different specific things. So part of my background is aviation sales. I was a sales director at Airbus. I am actively looking at operations roles in aviation and aerospace. And like that operations resume is a bit different than my operations resume, tailored at more like tech and SaaS based companies, specifically startups. So having like that base difference is big, but also like nowadays, it's not just enough to apply to these. Like, let's say you have like a perfectly tailored resume, like great. That's only step 1. Step 2, and personally, the only way I've gotten interviews has been through referrals, or I find out on LinkedIn who the hiring manager is or someone on that team, and I email them and I'm like, hey, have ChatGPT write the email for you. I'm like, hey, I applied for this role. I'm very interested, give like a quick little rundown, because you have to make yourself stand out. So it's not enough to apply with the tailored resume. Like you have to be aggressive. And I know some people are going to be like, oh, I don't like it when people reach out, or some people do, but in my view, I'm like it's like your point about personal branding earlier, like you have to be your own advocate during a job search nowadays. And you have to sort of like, you have to email them, you have to link them in, interact with their LinkedIn posts, like comments and posts, comment on them. Like people need to know your name. You need to make yourself stand out.
Yeah, and I think you said it again. Just hit the nail on the head. There is getting in touch with HR. Here's the thing: you have to have some thick skin too, because every time I do that, I mean, I'm going to say 100 out of 100, they don't reply to anything that you'll put out on LinkedIn. If you even want to connect with them, most of them want to stay an arm's length away from the candidate, so they won't accept your LinkedIn connection anyway. I would say too, though, and this goes back to, this is just, I guess, my own philosophy on LinkedIn as well, is you really need to understand why you're on LinkedIn and what your motivation is. I have, over 5,000, almost 6,000 connections on LinkedIn. A long time ago, when I did open for work, I got 3 responses back from the people in my circle, and that was it. And you're going to get, and there's a couple of things that happen once you do that. I would say if you're on there to get as many connections as you possibly can, you can do that. Are they going to be meaningful? No.
Exactly.
And
like
if you want to get
quantity.
Yeah, if you want 5,000 connections, it's going to take some time and you can do it. But if you want to get that shingle that goes 500 and 500 plus, I promise you that you're better off doing quality over quantity, only accepting those invitations that are relevant to you, or that you could be relevant to them at some point in the future. But don't chase after a number, because when you need that connection, I'd say you're not going to get what you need out of those people. Don't misunderstand LinkedIn either. It's a B2B site. It's a business to business site. Once you want to go open for business, it requires someone on your connection to do something. And my experience so far is that when you're on LinkedIn, you're going to be relevant for 24 hours. You're going to see, your activity spike like 4,000%.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day it's going to drop down again.
Yep.
And you're going to be exactly where you were.
Yep.
And nothing really changes. But I think to your point though, too, is I guess make sure that the connections you have on LinkedIn are ones that you want to have,
Mm-hmm.
that are going to be relevant to you.
Yep.
And then again, do the work on doing with HR, is always getting in contact with HR. So what I do is I'll apply for the position. And here's what I also do, just because you said about Easy Apply. So I've gone through employment consultants before, and Easy Apply, depending on what you're using it for, but for the most part, Easy Apply, LinkedIn bundles all Easy Apply applications and then sends them to the company. Now, they don't necessarily send them within 24 hours. It could be every 15 days. So by the time they send that bulk of Easy Apply over to the company, that role is either already filled, and it might even already be off their website. So what I typically do is if I see Easy Apply for a company, I'll go okay, and then I'll go directly to the company's website and I'll apply through there. I never apply blindly through Easy Apply because you just don't know where it's going. And I've been on Easy Apply where the job doesn't exist on the company's website anymore. So the easiest thing to do, I think the easiest and the best opportunity is to go to their website. That's where they're going to look for, that's where they're going to look first initially outside of their own organization. But yeah, so I'll attach the resume, the cover letter, to the HR person on LinkedIn, and then I'll send it, and then I'll follow up after a few days later. I want to say something else though. You did something for me when we talked last week, and you said this, and I want you to kind of reiterate what you told me. Is you need to treat finding a job as a job, which means you wake up at a certain time. You work out that week as if every day you're just trying to find a job and getting better at trying to find one. And then the caveat to that was take weekends off. And I wasn't doing that. I was dragging this process through 7 days.
Yes. So that's actually the biggest thing I tell people is, since you're treating applying for a job as a full-time job, you need to take weekends off. It's a Monday for you to basically treat it as a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. You're going to burn yourself out. And trust me, once you tailor your third resume of the day, the words bleed together. Do you know what I mean? They look the same. You're more likely to I'll admit, like, I'm not perfect. I'm very good at this, but I've caught myself making a very like a small stupid mistake that had I just taken like a 15-minute break, or like went to go walk my dog or go grab a coffee, I would have spotted. So but that small careless mistake can be the difference between whether or not, especially for my role in operations, when, part of the role requirement is to be on top of the details. Like, it's not a good representation. And so I tell people, like, our conversation earlier, like quality versus quantity, but also you do need the numbers. So it is kind of this game of, obviously wanting to have the highest quality possible, but you do need to have quite a few applications out there. But yeah, no, and also when you're applying for a job, like a full-time job, it's not just applying for jobs. It's like reaching out to people in your network, letting them know you're looking. If what I've done actually once or twice is I was applying for a role at a company that I knew no one and none of my connections knew anyone, but I was really interested. I just randomly messaged people that worked there. Like, I found someone that was like kind of aligned, with my background. Like, maybe they also lived in New York, or maybe they went to the same law school or business school as I did. And I would just be like, hey, like, I see you got your JD from, the Antonin Scalia School of Law as well, and you work here. I'm applying for this role. Like, I would love it if you could get a referral. And I always like to mention, because I understand that sometimes at companies, internally, if you have a referral that gets hired, usually the person referring you gets like a small little bonus. So it's a full-time job, but no, definitely take weekends off and treat it like 9 to 5.
Yeah, so it was interesting you just said that too. So you obviously have a really strong background, and you have an MBA and you have a JD.
Yes.
And when you're applying, do you feel like maybe when you talk about just being overqualified, that comes into play as well?
That's an interesting question, because there are definitely roles I've applied for where I'm like, oh, I'm like a great fit, and then I won't get hired for it. of course, you never know the reason. And I think you and I have discussed this before, but like, you also have to have a lot of confidence in the job application process. Because of course, part of me is like, you should be open to feedback, but like, you really got to learn how to like know your worth in this process, because just because a company doesn't choose you, exactly like you said, you may just be overqualified. But no, like, people are rarely going to tell you that. Or if they say, oh, we decided to go in a different direction, or we've decided to proceed with a candidate whose background aligns more closely with the role we have. Like, these are responses I get a lot. I think a lot of it is reading in between the lines, but I think the other part of it is the quicker you move on, the quicker you can find your good fit.
Right. But so let me ask you too, though. So I think part of it is that the expectation is when you read the job description and you understand that there's alignment that you see. I feel like it's almost a little unfair to someone in HR to say, well, she's overqualified. But I'm also really good at what I do. I have a really strong background. I read the job description. Unless you're lying to me, I see a ton of alignment here. It really is up to me to define whether or not I am overqualified for this job, and then whether I want to apply for it or not. Why isn't that up to me? Like, why isn't that up to me to say, yeah, I know what you're asking for in terms of responsibilities. I've read it all. I see alignment here, but I also see growth within the organization. I see opportunities to learn something new. And it's up to me to decide whether or not, and if you put down what what the pay is, that's up to me to decide whether or not I'm comfortable with that pay. And don't turn me down because you think that I'm overqualified and I wouldn't succeed in this role. Um, I get that too sometimes, which is leave that up to me to decide, and let's have an interview and let's talk about what those things look like. But I think a lot of them will basically, 86 your application because you're overqualified, and 9 times out of 10 you're not going to succeed here. But that 1%, like getting someone like you, even if it's that 1% that comes in that can change an organization, I think I'd rather have those odds than not having you come on board, at least for the interview portion.
Absolutely. I mean, also, it's not, the role that the company you and I had met with. I mean, you didn't use the words overqualified, but it was basically like, you're also assuming that the job description you see is 100% truthful and reflective of what the company is looking for. I've talked to a lot of friends in HR, specifically recruiting and talent, and they've said, a lot of times when they put a job description out, like, it's kind of just something that they come up with preliminary thoughts, and it's revised over time. So also, like, for the overqualification component, it's also, I agree with you, but it's also assuming that everything you see on the job description is what the company is actually looking for. A lot of my friends in recruiting have told me that it's not always the case, actually, or they'll revise it. I remember I applied for this one fintech company. I had final round interview with this guy on one team. He ended up halting the hiring, but the guy that had hired me also interviewed me for that round was the guy's counterpart on another team. He was hiring. So 2 weeks later, he calls me and he's like, hey, would you be interested in working on my team? I was like, yeah, sure. Let's talk about it. And then, like, come find out, he paused hiring on the position. And then I saw it 2 months later, they were still looking for it. I bring this up as an example of, like, sometimes it takes employers a while to figure out what they're looking for. So like you said, they could have someone in front of them, such as myself. Like, I check all the boxes, like the education, JD, MBA. I have been doing this for like 11 plus years of like operational efficiency, strategy, growth. But sometimes there's just things that sometimes the employers just haven't figured it out, and it takes time. And again, you have to really grow thick skin and not take it personally.
Right. So I think that taking the thing personally is, I don't know if you're like me, but I'll wake up, look at my email and go, hey, yeah, we're not moving forward with you. We picked another candidate. And I think, again, it goes back to, and they're not going to be able to do this, but again, the amount of time and effort you put into an application where it's not an easy apply, or, I accept that if I just used a resume and then just half-heartedly applied, but you do have to have some thick skin to understand that you're competing against a ton of other people, highly qualified people, and you might feel that you're different, but at the end of the day, you're competing with some really good people out there. but it is still painful to have, day after day of either a non-response or, 2 months later, they'll give you yeah, we chose another person. Like, well, yeah, because it's been 2 months. I mean,
Yeah, I assume such.
yeah, thanks for now making my day negative. I wasn't
Right.
even thinking about you, but now I am. But so it is difficult out there. I think, even for someone like you, and that's why I wanted you on, because I thought, why not at least put you out there in front of a ton of people that I know. I know a ton of people in HR. I know a lot of people in aerospace, but I know a lot of people that would look at you and go, "Why haven't we seen her before?" And she's got a really strong background. She's in operations. She's worked for Amazon. She's worked for Airbus, and some really, those are big names. And you've got a really strong background. Your education is amazing as well. But again, the principal reason we're here is to see how can we get you in front of as many people as possible to see you beyond your resume. And I think we've done a good job of kind of understanding your background in terms of what you're looking for. What is that criteria that you're looking for right now?
Yeah, so it's in general, I'm looking for an operations role, so like a more senior leadership one. So I mean, I've worked, as I said earlier, I've worked everywhere from startups with like 10 people to the Amazons and Airbuses of the world and the Gartners. I would, if I could like have like a magic wand and sort of like create my perfect role in like the perfect company, it would be, like a startup or small to mid-sized company. Industry wise, like I said, I'm looking for aerospace, aviation, and tech. Tech is broad, so Gen AI, which is also broad, but SaaS based, because those are where my background lies. And then, but for me, the most important thing is the role and the people I work with. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced this, but I have been in companies where I have stayed there longer than I probably should have because of the people. Like, I just really liked my team. I really liked my manager. I've also been at companies for a very short time because it was just not a good culture fit. Again, nothing negative to say about them or me. It's just, sometimes a square doesn't fit into a triangle, and you just, but, because also in my experience, like I'm a very big proponent of work-life balance. I have my life outside of work that I love and I cherish. I also do love my professional life, but also part of what helps me get up and go to work every morning, like, is the people I work with. It's my team. It's the, everyone you work with. I saw an article actually the other day that said your manager has a bigger effect on your mental health than any other specific individual, like your actual manager. And if you think about it, there's 24 hours in a day. Like, if you work, 9 hours a day, that's less than 50% of your day. There's one person that you interact with for less than 50% of your day that has the biggest impact on your mental health. Like, that's so one thing. And another reason I'm still open to work is I am being very cognizant of, I guess you'd call it culture fit, but just also, am I going to get like excited to, am I excited to work with these people? That's a big one for me. But yeah.
And how do you do that? So you navigate the resume, you navigate the interview portion, but there isn't enough time to kind of figure out. You're only speaking with a very small portion of that company when you're talking to HR, or even maybe the hiring manager, or maybe a few team members. But to understand the culture, in totality, that's difficult to do in an interview. But I think that goes back to, spending the hours to understand the company, on their website, on their social channels. What are employees saying about it? How are they engaging with their company? Are they philanthropic? Those are things you can find out on their social networks. So there's a ton you can do there as well. And I think you said it right, which is, you might need a job right now, and it's difficult in terms of getting one, and there aren't a lot out there, which is why you need to be very specific about what you want as well. It's like you said, I've had some managers that have caused enough trauma just because.
Same.
And I never really understood, other than it's just ego. And I think that there is some some sort of power that comes with managing people. And I think most aren't engaged in growing people and really being an advocate for their growth, either within that department or outside the department. And I think that's missing. And I've always wanted to be, and I have done that with roles that I've had. I've been chief marketing officer, VP of marketing. I've had every executive position I've ever had, and I've always trained them to have my job. Like, this is what it's going to take for you to replace me, and I'm happy for you to do that. And I'm not afraid for you to come in and learn from me and participate in the work that I'm doing. I've had people come in and run my own meetings for me. People that weren't allowed to be in a C-suite meeting. I said, I'm going to have her or him come in and actually give you the updates on what we're doing. And I'll sit back, and that's what you do. And I promise you that looks much better for you than you actually doing it for yourself. The fact that you trust the people that are working for you to come and give that same information to a C-suite group, it says a lot more about you in a very good way, but also says a lot about the people that you work with. I don't see that often these days. And that's the other thing about when you're talking with, at your level, especially mine as well, you're going to be working with C-suite people, and you're going to want to understand how they behave, how they manage their people, their organization, what's important to them. And I'm thinking that when you have these interviews and you're going to be working with, C-suite people on a regular basis, that be part of the interview process. Like, demand that. I'd love to talk to the people that I'm going to be working with on a daily basis.
Yeah. And it's, so your comment earlier about like, how do you know if the people you're interviewing with are going to be the people? Cause you don't really interview with them that long, and there's so much just judgments and decisions you have to make based on that interaction, in addition to like your outside research. And I always say, it's kind of like a first date, right? Because also everyone's on their best behavior in an interview, like, let's be real. I try and interview obviously on my best behavior, but also, like, what you see is what you get. Like, I don't want you to agree to go on a second date with me, to agree to a second interview, and then a third. And then it's like, oh, well, the Ashley on the first one is different than the Ashley on the third one. Because, like, frankly, that's a waste of your time. That's a waste of my time. So the way I view it is I try and balance it with being on my best behavior, but also like, this is me. Like, this is what you're going to get. I think a lot of that too is you get better with it over time, as I'm sure you can attest to. You also just learn, I think a lot, I don't really like to say this, but like, it's kind of like a vibe check, to be honest, sometimes. I mean, so when I got my role as a sales director at Airbus, I was fresh out of law school. I had just passed the bar in DC, and I had no aviation background, no engineering, no technical. I had a business development background. So I applied to the job literally because I saw the job description. I was like, oh, planes are cool. Like, why not? Ended up getting called in for an interview. And then I'll never forget, my manager, who I'm still keep in touch with to this day, he and I on site at the interview, turns out we both are like obsessed with dogs, specifically pit bulls. We literally just talked about pit bulls for 45 minutes. And that was, you know what I mean? Like, it was a good fit. Like I said, I was there for 2 years. I still keep in touch with him. He doesn't have a dog anymore. He has a cat. So that's a separate conversation. But, it's your comment too earlier about during the interview. I think it's important I almost feel like the emphasis should be on non-work related stuff. Like, yes, of course, I'm all for some questions of like, let's spend half of this, just highlight to me some of your experience, so I can judge how that will transfer to this role. But a lot of it too, especially at like the senior and the VP and like the C-suite level, is just like you said, like, we're assuming you can do this job or else you wouldn't be here. The point of the interview is, will we enjoy working with you? Will you be a good fit with our culture? Will you add to our culture in a positive way? So like, if I can talk with like about movies or dogs or something I'm really into, yeah, you're a good fit. But if, you have trouble, so I think that's something I also look for is like my interview with my boss at Airbus. Like, are we just going to talk about dogs for 45 minutes? Or, to me, that was the best indicator of like, oh, this is a good fit.
Yeah, and those are fairly rare too. I've had a few of those interactions where it was less about the job and more about who you are as a person. Because you're going to spend, like you said, like you're there for about 10 or 12 hours every day, working and, sitting beside someone. Everyone has a bad day.
And being stressed.
Yeah, everyone does. And it's really good to understand someone's emotional intelligence. And I think that's the piece about and I think that's the piece where I would much rather, and that's why I always asked you, like, I don't want to talk about your resume. I want to talk about who you are beyond the resume. Tell me something different about yourself. And, what is your emotional intelligence? And you were that from the beginning. Like I knew what you were going to come in and say, but I didn't want that from you. I already knew from your resume and then just by meeting you. And we've got this thing in common, I think, because when you get to a point where you're like us and we've got some years under us, I've met every version of a person. I know who you are in the first 10 minutes because you don't look like that person, you don't talk like that person, but you are that person. I know who you are, and it's just tell me something different. Like I know that you're going to tell me that you've done very, very well with your other jobs, but knowing who you are outside of work spoke volumes about you. And that was sort of the thing where I go, I just don't think that, based on what she's looking for, that this is going to be the right job for her. Like, I know she can do it, but then there's two things. One was, and this is where I think when you're in HR, or even if you're just interviewing someone, understand that they were going to ask you to change your life. Like right now, like you'd have to move from New York to LA or from anywhere. That's a huge responsibility at a human level, like a human level. We're asking you to move across country, that you can do it. Like there's no question that you're the A type that can come in and you'll figure out how to live in LA. You'll figure out how to do all the right things. But is it fair to move you here and not give you exactly what you were expecting?
Yeah. And that's, because for this role where you and I met, like I would have had to picked up my entire life from New York to LA. And like, I'm not a West Coast person, but I'm open to relocation for the right role. And I'm honestly like very grateful that you made that judgment call, because I think I told you, like, frankly, I would have been devastated if I had relocated my life from New York to LA. And I found out, 6 months in, like, holy crap, like this is not as advertised. Or, I was told I could come in with a lot of autonomy and just do my thing and change things, and cut cost and implement new best practices. But had I not been able to do that, and that's kind of devastating to learn in any job, but especially if you've moved your life cross country.
Yeah, and you have a human responsibility.
I agree.
You have to have that when you're looking at someone and you're bringing them on, is to look at and go, listen, we're not going to give her everything that she needs, but we need her here. And even if we get 75% of her, that's good enough. But that's not what you asked. I'm giving you 100%, and it needs to be, you need to look at someone and go, we're going to ruin their lives if we get this wrong. And that's the piece that's really, that's the sad piece, which is I think they can go, well, if it doesn't work out, we'll just hire someone else. But you've just ruined someone completely. And I think that's the part that's difficult. But also I think that goes in with, making sure you're asking the right questions during the interview, making sure that you talk to HR about the role and what they're expecting, and just getting a good idea. But then again, I've done this too, where I've gone into the interview and I've literally said, listen, I've given you everything that you've asked for. I've left myself on the table here. There isn't anything we've not discussed. There isn't anything that I'm hiding from you. I've given you everything, and there isn't any more I can add to this conversation, because I've literally given you everything that I need. Is there something that you've not heard from me that you need to hear? And let's talk about that. And 9 times out of 10, they won't say anything. And that's the piece that kind of bothers me, because if something's been left out, or you're just, it's at that hour mark and we only schedule an hour for this interview, it's probably better to say, I'd love to extend this because, we've had a great conversation. There are a few things I still want to talk to you about that we didn't cover. Or let's do this again over the phone. I just want to make sure that we're making the best possible decision for both of us. And I think most of the time, they're like, well, I've got 4 other candidates. It's not worth investing another hour with this one. And I really feel like if you had done that, you would have gotten a better understanding of who this person was beyond the role. And, but again, that's just my style. That's what I do when I interview anyone, which is, again, not to, you're there, you've already made it. Like 75% of the job is yours. It really is. At 25% for me, that's, who is she? Like, can I work with her? And can she be a really good peer for me? Because we're going to be working together side by side. And we both were coming from the outside. Like this company that we were going to work for, they don't hire outside. It's always internal. We would have been the first 2. And I would love to have had someone, but I knew that, again, I don't want to harp on that experience. But other than to say, I think that's also a quality about you, is that when I first met you, that you were who you were when you sat down.
Thank you.
And you have this sort of energy about you. And I don't know if it's because you're from the East Coast. I'm from the West Coast. Like, I'm born and raised. So we're completely different people, sort of. But I knew from just meeting you, you were going to tell me exactly what I needed to hear. And it was truthful. You had a strong background. Amazon was really interesting to hear you talk about that. But I knew that I wanted to know who you were as a person. And this is why we have a relationship now, is because we spent that time, and I really liked you during that interview. And I'm like, I really want to be part of what she's doing and staying in touch and make sure that she gets the best place she possibly can with however I can help you. Because as much as I felt like I was going to ruin your life by saying, yes, I also feel like there's an opportunity when you have these relationships that you keep them. And is it weird to say, hey, listen, I met her during the interview, I didn't hire her, we kind of clicked, and I still want her to be successful. I feel like there's an opportunity for her to be really successful out there. And then, almost a year later, you're still looking for an opportunity again, which is why we're having this conversation. I want as many people that I know on this podcast. And I can say as well that I've worked in, high leadership positions. I've been C-suite with a lot of companies. Help startup companies go public, a really strong background. The only reason I'm saying that is because I have a strong opinion about your ability to make change in an organization and do it at a very high level. So coming from me, that works with people that are very high level, founders of companies, Fortune 500 companies, startups that went public. My perspective in meeting you is you're at that 1%. Like, you are what everybody wants in their organization. It's difficult to see that on LinkedIn. It is, because it's a profile. So I thought this particular opportunity would be, how can we showcase Ashley and get her at least some visibility on LinkedIn, or utilize this on your own social channels so they can see who you are behind kind of the roles that you've had and the education that you've had.
Yeah, and I remember when you first told me about this, I thought it was great. First of all, I was extremely flattered you thought of me, especially to do the first one. But then also, it's you're exactly right. Like, it's, you mentioned when you actually talked to me, and it did not take long to figure out like who I am and like, is this like someone that we can work well with or can do the job well? Like, in order to make that judgment, you have to interact with the person or experience them off of the paper of a resume or off of the page of a LinkedIn. Like, you can only be so you're kind of limited in the amount of you can express your self-truth on those platforms. And that being said, there are people who are, like the LinkedIn influencers who are like, super active, posting every day, videos, which is great, but also like, you don't know if that's the real person until you meet them. And so, no, I think this is a wonderful idea and also like the stigma of like looking for work is being viewed as some sort of thing that you like should be hush hush about or like not talk about. Like, I mean, especially in this economy, like I actually like an hour before this recording started, I had a friend message me that one of their friends just got laid off. Last week, another friend of a friend got laid off. Like this, layoffs are not uncommon. They're nothing to be ashamed of. In my experience, like 9 times out of 10, it literally has nothing to do with the person. It's not due to actual underperformance or anything. It's due to internal factors that are outside of the candidate. And it's kind of going to my comment earlier about like, you really have to have tough skin and stick with it, where it's like, don't be embarrassed. Don't be ashamed. Like there's nothing wrong about it. Like you said, it's been about a year. I have my own consulting I've been doing, but yeah, it's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's nothing to be ashamed of. And if anything, I think the stigma of what this is doing, which is actually highlighting something that is usually hushed about. So I really liked it. Yeah, great.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we can help other people. Like I'd love to have you come on and be sort of an advocate for some people who are also open for work.
I have a list of people.
I think putting bigger brains together to kind of help them get amplified. And I would say though that too, I mean, part of being on, the podcast this podcast specifically got started with people who were, I really wanted to figure out, I knew some people that were in the entertainment industry, sports industry, people who started their own companies, highly successful athletes. I was trying to figure out, what is that thing inside these people that causes them to bet on themselves? And I wanted to figure out what that was. Like there is this moment where you go, you're going to decide to be yourself and be a boxer. Like I knew this guy that I trained with his dad, and he's a professional boxer. He boxed in the '84 Olympics. His son, Amika, who is a boxer now, has won a ton of belts. I wanted to know what it is inside of him that says, I can be a boxer. I can do this forever. This is my passion. And then to the guy that, Kenny Sanders, he was a pro BMX biker, owned his own clothing line, really successful guy, started his own motorcycle company. But what is it about these people inside that triggers them? There's this element of something that I wanted to figure out. What is that thing? And that's how it initially got started. And so I've met some really good people, amazing people. And they all have that same quality, which is they've decided to bet on themselves. And it's really inspiring to see that, it's when their backs were against the wall. Like there's no other option. So the theme about how strong was, how strong do you have to be to bet on yourself? It's when being strong is the only answer. Like literally, and that's sort of the situation that we're in right now with people who are open for work. How strong do you have to be to continue that fight? It's your only option. Like you can give up. That's not going to turn out very well. Depending on people within your circle, I'd like to think that's a good way to get it done. But unfortunately, most people out there that are your connections aren't willing to do that for you. They're willing to go, hey, good luck. When you put on that open for work, you'll get a lot of comments about good luck, hope you make it. I don't need that from you. I need action from you. I need you to say.
I don't need the thoughts and prayers. I need,
or the hand, I don't need that. You know what I need you to do? I need you to go to your own company's website and see if there's something there that fits with what I'm trying to get done.
Correct.
And then be an advocate of mine.
Yes.
And that's the unfortunate thing. And I've known a lot of people throughout my career, and I can say, and I'm not going to say that, I'm not asking them to do something they shouldn't do, but if you have a relationship with someone and it's meaningful enough, then you have the responsibility to carry these people forward if you can. And it requires you to go within your organization and say, hey, I know this guy. I'll sponsor him throughout this process because I've worked with him. That rarely happens. And that really, then you need to start reflecting on who you're actually connecting with. Because the circle you have, the 5,000 people, 6,000 people on LinkedIn, they're not your friends.
No, they're not your advocates either. They're
not your advocates. And it's not it's not a Facebook. It really is a B2B site. And I think the open for work thing started during COVID or just prior to that.
It was around there. Yeah. About like 5-ish years ago, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the economy at the time, and then COVID happened, and a lot of people were getting laid off. And I think it was a good idea at the time for LinkedIn to say, hey, we're going to showcase people who are open for work. The issue is that there was no strategy behind it other than changing the banner on your profile picture. So I would love to have something like this where we go on LinkedIn and we start working with people who are open for work, who don't have the ability to amplify themselves as a brand. On my side, I've built companies. I've helped companies go public. I know how to do marketing and branding. I've done that very successfully. Why can't I do it for someone else? Like, why can't I do it for someone who is in need? So that's what I'm doing. And by no means are you a charity case. you have, and I'm not treating you that way either.
Mhm.
You're going to do really well. You're going to find something that you love to do. You're going to find something that you have a passion for, and a company that you really have a passion for working for. And you've got this personality that, once people meet you and during that interview process, you have a really good opportunity to get that job. There are other people who need to learn how to get that done, learn to go through the interview process, learn how to do all the things they need to get done on the interview side, or even the resume side, managing LinkedIn. There's a lot of people still doing things wrong, and they're still, and I can say this too. It's been a year, but I have sent out close to 1,000 customized resumes, and at least 4 hours of research, averaging 4 hours of research on the resume writing itself, making sure that it's lined up correctly. I use an AI tool called JobScan that just matches the resume up with the requirements. But I don't leave it to that. I don't let AI write it for me. It's a good way to just say, hey, here's what the job says it needs. Here's your resume. Here's some things you need to figure out. Be truthful about it, but here's what's missing. And then the work begins. That's when it starts. So what I want to do is kind of help people that are on that sort of open for work piece, and help them get in front of people who would look at them beyond the resume and go, I didn't even know this person existed, but they sound exactly like something we need within our organization. And I think you're the first, which I was really happy because, you had a really strong background. I've said that a million times before. Good personality, great education, and you're just a likable person. I mean, that's the other. And this wasn't supposed to be an interview. This, not for a job, but really just to kind of get to know who you are. Let people see who I see you as. I think we've talked about, what you're looking for in terms of a job, the companies you want to look for. Your work-life balance is important to you as well. And then working with some really good people within the organization to kind of understand who you're going to be working with, what kind of team you're going to have. I will say, though, just the last point on this piece, though, is when you mentioned startups. I've worked for startups since 2016. Some really good, amazing startups. Neo was one of them that just went public not too long ago. But some really strong startups. I would say anybody out there who has a startup that needs someone in operations, getting someone that has some really strong intellectual equity and a really strong background with really good companies is to look at someone like you and say, hey, we need to bring them in so that day one, our organization is set up to succeed. And you're going to bring this amazing experience from Amazon and Airbus, just to name a few. I mean, you have a lot on your resume, but you are that 1% that could come in and completely make sure that the company's foundation is correct. And that's where I think the startup piece is really nice for me as well, because a lot of people aren't. There are people who are set up to work for startups, and there are people who are not.
Yes, startups are not a walk in the park.
Yeah, you have to have the sort of innate ability to love and hate risk at the same time, but to not let it affect you in a way that it's going to hurt your performance. And the startup space is very difficult to do. It's hard to navigate. Succeeding is hard, and there's a lot of work that needs to get done. And I would say the companies that I've worked for in the past that hired people hired for attrition. They hired for attrition so that eventually they'll land on the core. So they'll hire 1,000 people because they need as many people as they possibly can to launch. Then through attrition, they're going to have their base. The really good successful startups hire their base first, not afraid to start the company with 5 really smart, brilliant people, and then grow from there. Don't hire 1,000 people within 2 weeks, and then they'll eventually leave, and then you'll have, and here's what's going to end up happening. Of the people who have stayed, they're not necessarily the greatest people. They just don't want to leave because they don't have a job. And those are the people who will stick around until the doors close, but they're not really doing a lot to help the company succeed either. Which is why hire the core team initially. Hire the 5 executives that are going to help you succeed recruiting and to get this company off to a fast, successful start. That's where I see you coming in, having you come into a startup that understands the operations side. And I don't want to say operations too, because I think that limits you as well, because you have a lot of experience beyond operations. Because operations is, when you say marketing, right? Like marketing, it's this umbrella with like 16 to 20 verticals underneath marketing. What is it in marketing that you do? So operations is the same way. There's a lot of technical skill level within operations that you have to have. You're not just in operations. There's a ton of verticals under operations that you need to have a really good understanding of as well. So I think that's the piece that people would really understand. You know, having you come in on board, you're not getting someone that just does operations. You're someone who can come in and help build a company that has enough intelligence to help the marketing side, the strategy side, the business development side, the customer side. So it really is much more well-rounded than that. But I'm going off on a tangent because I don't want you to be pigeonholed like I am, like I'm just a marketer. It's not just marketing. It's not just operations. There's a lot of things underneath that help you succeed. So do you have any last words, Ashley?
Oh, last words. No, I mean, in summary, again, very flattered, very appreciative of, having me on here, being the first person you thought of. Again, I think this is a wonderful idea. I very much hope that this is something that you can use with other people as well. Mm-hmm. But no, like this is I think sort of like the whole point of this episode was a bit twofold, right? Like one, having people on here such as myself to talk about their background, talk about what they're looking for. And then also, the second part has been, we've just talked about like what it's been like applying for, looking for the next role, sort of like in this day and age, past like 12 to like 18 months. And I think that part is an ongoing conversation for sure. But no, I mean, I appreciate the opportunity. Obviously, I welcome anyone to reach out if they'd like. But no,
how do they find you? They're going to find you on LinkedIn, Ashley Post.
You can find me on LinkedIn. It's Ashley Post, P-O-S-T, and also my email. I don't have it written down, but it is quite simple. It's just ashley.rpost101@gmail. So, okay. And then feel free.
Well, thanks for being on. It was awesome getting to see you again and talking to you again. And we'll see where this goes. It's going to all be positive, though. No one's going to look at this podcast and not remember you. So anyone in my channel, anyone on my LinkedIn that's looking for someone in operations at a very high level, startup, mid-level company, major company, I can fully endorse Ashley. I think take a look at her, take a look at her LinkedIn. But I'd say most importantly is connect with her, get a conversation with her, and make sure that you understand who she is as a person, and explore a role that maybe she could fill for you guys. So anyway, good to see you again, Ashley. We'll catch up, and hopefully we'll see you on these podcasts again.
All right. Thanks, Troy.
Here I find